Hello and welcome to this special edition of Dialogue, Advancing Modernization. The global economy faces the challenge of fragmentation 2.0. The signal sent by China's two sessions is clear. Reshape the growth paradigm with new quality productivity, resist protectionism with high-level opening up, and build consensus in the South by empowering development. The global value of Chinese economy lies not only in scale growth, but also in providing development solutions without political conditions attached. What economic development goals did the two sessions convey, and how should we view China's developmental solutions? And as it seems the world is falling under a dark cloud as it returns to the law of the jungle environment, how can the opportunities brought by China's development, which is often regarded as a threat by the West, shed light and help drive global development? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today for the special edition are Zun Ahmad Khan, Research Fellow from the Center for China and Globalization, Professor John Gung, member of the Academic Committee at Pango Institution, Ottaviano Canuto, Senior Fellow with the Policy Center for the New South and former Vice President at the World Bank, John Ross, Senior Fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China, Arina Mirasan, Senior Researcher at the Institute for Global Dialogue, and Vanaris Chiang, Director of the China-ASEAN Studies Center from Caltech University. Welcome. Well, I started with our guests in the studio. So Zun, I'm sure all of you have followed the two sessions here. So what's your takeaway of the meeting?
What I would like to point out as we start this special program is that this is the last leg of the 14th five-year plan. And when this plan was initiated, there was a lot of skepticism about China's commitment to be more globally connected, to be a country that is not only consistently growing, but also thinking beyond that, sustainability, international interaction. And as we are here, with this year's two sessions, I think the biggest analyses, the biggest takeaways that we can take from it are, number one, that China, being a large economy, it is the one that has the highest prediction, 5% GDP growth rate. After a positive track record, among the G20 countries, this is the fastest growing economy. And we can see that that expectation is consistently there because previously also about 5% GDP growth was also achieved. So that's a very positive aspect of this meeting so far. Another is that China has deep confidence, and that's exhibited because the goals that have been set forward, for example, 12 million new jobs, the focus on new quality productive forces, all of these are based on positive development so far, positive achievements in the last year, in the last 3-4 years, and are connected with global priorities. So there is a focus on sustainability. There is a focus on continuing that way forward with developing countries along as well. So the domestic goals are deeply linked with China's international approach as well. And lastly, I would like to say that we are in a world that has new challenges. Of course, with the latest Trump presidency and some of the messaging coming from there towards China, towards the world, there could have been a lot of skepticism and negativity. But the meeting so far, the communication so far is that while China is acutely aware, deeply aware of the new threats, the new emerging challenges of a global climate, China is anything but willing to shy away from continuous engagement with the world. The messaging is positive. There is awareness, understanding of the challenges that exist, but there is a positive outlook based on the track record so far. So I think in a nutshell, you see confidence, you see consistency, and you see a positive outlook towards open engagement within China towards the world.
Yeah, rather positive there. John, what figures, our Chinese, worker report, government worker report or Chinese documents like to talk about figures, right?
Right.
Any impressive figures from this year's government worker report by the Premier?
Yeah, well, first of all, I pay a lot of attention to that government work report because it was delivered at the same time when President Trump in Washington delivered a State of Union address, actually. These are two government work reports practically at the same time within just about an hour, and it could not be more different from each other. I think President Lee's speech is very, with substance, with figures, with statistics, with very down-to-earth stuff, whereas President Trump's speech is very rhetorical, a lot of boasting and very kind of emotional. I think not so much about the real stuff and the substance and real numbers. Now back to your question about the growth target. I'm quite confident that, well, at least in my view, I think compare the same situation with the January and February last year, we're in much better shape. I think the economic performance figures are fairly solid. So given that, the fact that with the same goal essentially, about 5% growth, I'm more confident that we should be able to achieve this goal within the next 10 months or so. We are on good track. We have a good beginning, and hope that the momentum will continue.
John, as we talked about, obviously there's some headwinds, both domestically and externally, in terms of Chinese economic growth. But still, the government put forward around 5% growth target. Of course, at the same time, they have talked about, rolled out some very supportive measures to support that kind of growth. And how do you look at the prospect of Chinese economy 2025?
Well, the main thing for me that came out of the work report was what I would call realism. That was the main thing. I mean, let's go back and look at the fundamentals, because you can always fine-tune the immediate situation a little bit, which the government did last year. The growth went down a little bit too much in the middle of the year, and therefore it took rather strong measures in the last quarter to speed it up. So let's leave aside fine-tuning things. What's the fundamental things? The economy's growth rate is necessarily determined by two numbers. One is, how much does it have to invest to grow by 1%? The answer for China is about 8%. That's very efficient by international standards. The US has to invest about 10%, so that's one number. If you do that, if that's maintained, which means, of course, maintaining competitive policies, opening up and things like that, but it's not, you don't have to increase it, you just have to maintain it. That means that you have to invest 40% of GDP in order to grow by 5%. That seems to be the sort of target that is coming in. In that case, there's no fundamental reason why the growth rate should not be hit. The two warnings, which I don't think will derail things, but if one should keep an eye on from the point of problems, is one is the US economy is slowing down. It's not quite yet clear how much. The latest Atlanta Fed GDP now, that is trying to look at the GDP growth rate on the basis of other secondary indicators, is actually minus 2.5% for the first quarter. Well, if that occurred, that would be a drastic slowdown in the US economy. I tend to think that that's not going to occur. But the US economy has been growing above trend for the last 2 years. 2.9% in 2023, 2.4% in 2024. Its long-term growth rate's slightly above 2, so you would expect the US economy to dip. So I think that could be as significant even as the tariffs for the point of view of the negative trends coming out of the US. Secondly is the profit situation. The work report indicates that income of the population will grow in line with the GDP growth. That implies that the profit share would stay about what it is at the present time. But the profits, there is some pressure on the profits of companies. If you took industrial companies, they're no higher than was 5 years ago. I personally would like to see that a bit higher. But I want to stress, those are just, if you're running economic policy, these are things you've got to keep an eye on. The fundamental thing, that you invest 40%, you have to invest 8% to grow by 1%, indicates the 5%. So about 5% is extremely realistic target.
Raina, if you look at China, of course, it's China is the largest trading nation in terms of these goods. For example, it has it is the largest trading partner for like 150 economies around the world. Of course, China is part of the global South and a member of the BRICS group. I mean, from that point of view, how do you look at this 5% last year and then 5% continuous growth here?
Thanks for the question. I think the context of, global trade and where China finds itself today, I mean, the zeitgeist of the global economy is really marked by immense uncertainty and volatility, as we've been discussing. And part of why China's growth is so remarkable, it's the environment in which it finds itself and how it's able to craft its own way and navigate a number of geopolitical conundrums, especially in the face of a weakened multilateral system, but having a key understanding whereby you can't upend the system because it's not necessarily working for everyone. That's not an option, but it's important to respect whatever institutions exist and chart a way forward. And I think that, coupled with China's ability to plan, it really identifies the short and medium-term goals in which are much more easily attained and place on the horizon the longer-term understanding of where it wants to be. And so I believe part of this growth is definitely tied to China's ability to plan, essentially. I haven't seen this with other developing countries with these kinds of concerns as, to the degree that China has. But you see, economic growth is definitely the goal, but the industrial policy is the key factor to driving this and creating the space for their business to have the facilitation support through government. And these are also factors in which China becomes much more predictable and resilient in the global economy, which is welcome during this time, I would say. And you have various parts of the world living in a moment where they begin to look inward, and it creates supply chain disruptions, market uncertainty, inflation, on and so forth. But China is now considered the stable but very pragmatic partner.
Yeah, a pragmatic partner. Speak of that, Vanrys probably have a closer observation of the Chinese economy, especially trade and investment with ASEAN countries. Cambodia, of course, where you are from, is one of the 10 ASEAN members. We do see increasing Chinese investment and also trade, and also the transfer of technologies or investment of the Chinese tech companies, in particular e-commerce, for example, between the two sides, China, Cambodia, China, ASEAN. That has been on the rise for some time. So that trend, let's say, that will continue.
Obviously, I think China now standing up to inject a new impetus to the region and the world when it comes to economic recovery from the COVID-19 and now the disruption caused by protectionism and geopolitical competitions. Southeast Asian country, or ASEAN, has been the top trading partner of China. And within the framework of our bilateral FTA, China-ASEAN FTA, and regional comprehensive economic partnership, I think this regional mechanism will push forward our kind of win-win kind of economic operations. I just would like to stress also the importance of innovation-driven growth model and also productivity-driven growth model of China. So that is the pathway that really kind of provide a solid foundation for China to achieve this 5% growth. And it will be sustained for coming years if China continue on this path, and especially to pursue this high-level opening up and promote international integration and connectivity.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's come back and to talk about this, growth model, John. Of course, everybody understands in the past, China used to rely on, say, export, heavy investment, industrial production, property sector, for example, for economic growth. And the Chinese government has made it clear they are pursuing a high-quality development, meaning a growth led by high tech, by innovation, by education, for example, and also by domestic consumption. Right. I mean, look at the past year 5% goal. It was realized despite the sluggish growth in the property sector, and also probably low consumption, let's say, weak consumption, and also outside challenges with tariffs, of course, from Biden administration at that time. So can we say that, high-tech growth is pretty strong right now, is an important driver for the for the expansion?
It appears to be the case, and I hope so. China's economy is kind of a little bit unique in the sense that if you look at the industries on the horizon, okay, industries of the future, many industries actually being dominated by Chinese companies. So you look at the solar power, for example, electric car, look at the batteries, look at the drones, for example, the robotics, for example. More and more industries that are becoming sort of not dominated, but at least heavily contested by companies from China. As a matter of fact, there's actually some complaints. If you talk to economists from other parts of the world, I was just having a conversation with some economists from World Bank today. Certainly, economists in the United States, I mean, they've been seeing this and they've been wondering why it is the case. What's explaining this, right? Why all of a sudden, this myth about Chinese companies cannot innovate is totally debunked, and you see this series of a burst of breakthroughs in various technologies. And I'm pretty sure these things are going to continue. I think, there's something right that the China economic growth model has been working so far, has a lot to do with a couple of things in my view. First of all, we have a very large market. Scale really accounts, right? That's very important. Another thing I can think of is that Chinese consumers are very prone to risk-taking. In other words, they're very accommodating to new brands, new products, new technologies. They're ready to
embrace digital transformation.
Exactly. They're very willing to embrace. They're willing to give companies a trial. So I think that's very unique. Another thing I can think of is that we have an intensely competitive market. We have so much competition, and the consumer tastes are very dynamic. They keep changing, right? And for companies to effectively compete on this intensively competitive market, you have to constantly change. You have to constantly come up with new products. And this pressure is just so high that it's forcing the companies to invest heavily in R&D, to invest heavily in innovation, to come up with new products. So this is actually a very very good cycle in my view. And the last thing I want to say is the role of the government. In China, the competition is not just between companies. The competition is also between among the local governments behind these companies, right? And each local government wants to have their companies in their jurisdiction to be successful. So, they're also helping these companies. So we have a very unique growth model, in my view.
Mr. Canuto, I still remember, after the COVID, it's like all of a sudden, you see the new energy vehicles or the EVs from China becoming the headlines of the world. Were you surprised to see this, this rapid rise of the Chinese new vehicles there?
Not so much, indeed, for a single reason. See, if one compares two areas of technological rivalry, where the US and China can be compared, in one of them, which is the case of semiconductors, still, of course, China is just almost there yet with respect to the most advanced segments of semiconductors, despite the restrictions to access by the US. But in the case of clean energy and related products, including your electric vehicles, see, China spent well in terms of investments over the last 12 years, a sum of investments in clean energy that is larger than the sum of the total of European and US investments in clean energy. And China used it well. It has been the reduction of costs of prices of windmills and solar panels that has allowed the advancement of the climate transition abroad. So it doesn't surprise me. And the electric vehicles are, let's say, a chapter of that.
But let's move on to domestic consumption. Like if you look at China, in particular relationship with ASEAN countries, Cambodia, China, I know if you look at the growth of the domestic consumption or the capacity here in China, one example probably would be durian, from Thailand, from Malaysia. The increase, is so rapid that people happily found out that there's a huge appetite for durian products from Southeast Asian countries there. That certainly is a case in point of the growing consumption capability here in China.
Yes, definitely China is a big market for us, Southeast Asia, and we are confident and positive and optimistic about the future of our engagement with China. You mentioned the agricultural products. I think now the domestic consumption in China is very high in terms of the demand for tropical fruits. You mentioned like durian, banana, mangoes, and cashew nuts, to name a few. So this is the kind of optimistic trend, positive trend that we're going to expand our export market to China. So in relation to that, e-commerce, a lot of e-commerce platform from China also established across Southeast Asian region, sometime in joint venture and partnership. So this e-commerce also start booming through digital payment system. So very convenient now, a cashless economy. As now across Southeast Asia, a digital payment is a kind of a developing very fast. So that e-commerce together with the consumption-driven economy China and the export capacity of Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia itself also moving toward consumption-driven economy because we cannot rely so much on external markets because our main market is still the United States and Europe when it comes to the textile industry and other manufactured products. So we need to redirect our growth model toward regional driven, regional as a consumption and production base.
Well, John Ross here. If you look at the world, of course, the U.S. market is very important for a lot of countries, because of the strong consumption there. But for country, I'm thinking of if you want to transform the growth model from relying on export to consumption, it takes time, right?
Yes, but I think I'm afraid on this discussion on consumption, there's quite a lot of confusion in the discussion. Because one of the things I'm working on at the present time is nice with what they call big data. You can study with a few, provided you've got some nice programmers with you, computer programmers, you can study any number of countries and look at them from all sort of points of view. One of the most striking findings comes out, because there's a talk about increasing consumption, but that could mean one of two things. It could mean that you increase the rate of growth of consumption, which is highly desirable because it increases the living standards of the population. But the second thing that it's sometimes used to mean is you should increase the percentage of consumption in GDP. Well, not merely are they not the same thing, but it turns out factually that they're negatively correlated. That is, the higher the percentage of consumption in GDP, the lower will be the growth of consumption. Well, obviously for the population, what's important is what is their rate of growth of consumption, because nobody can eat a percentage. And if the goal was a high percentage of consumption in GDP, then one should take as a model places like the Central African Republic, where you have consumption levels of sort of 98%. So I'm afraid that there's quite a lot of confusion on this. What is necessary is to stimulate the rate of growth of consumption. And that is extremely important. But again, one of the things that comes out of this, also incidentally, we're now trying to apply large language models to it. We've got a DeepSeek very kindly, having put things into the open source domain, we can now fiddle around with its model and see what you can produce out of that. One of the things which comes out very strikingly is the difference in the pattern of growth between large economies and small economies. This is not very much in the literature, and because I was rather astonished to find out the differences. If you look at the large economies, they all have pretty much the same pattern of growth. That is, if you look at the percentage of net fixed capital investment in GDP and its growth rate, the correlation between the top 10 economies in the world is 0.95, which is a bit astonishing. I almost fell off my chair when I saw the number, because I was expecting only a bit of correlation, I think, come around 0.75, 0.8, something like that, because normally if a student comes to me with a correlation of 0.95, I think they've fiddled the evidence. But nevertheless, that is what is the case. So what really is happening at the present time is that China has a very, very fast rate of growth of consumption. It has by far the highest growth of consumption in the world over the last period, but with a low percentage of consumption in GDP. But that's logical because the two move in opposite directions. If China were to greatly increase the percentage of consumption in GDP, then its rate of growth of consumption would slow down. So the key thing is, as I say, for the population living standards, what is the percentage increase? So I think the consumption question is extremely important, but there's a little bit of confusion in the discussion, and that's why I rather concentrate at the present time in personal research on factual studies of this. And as I say, a bit of a surprise to find that there is such a sharp difference between large economies and small economies, but of course China is a large economy, so therefore really I don't wish to disparage small economies at all, but from the point of what China has to grow, only the comparisons to large economies is really relevant. End.
Well, John, this is a good point. At the same time, I have another question that is related, to this consumption. Per capita GDP of China is still like 1/4 or half of the U.S. per capita GDP, right? I mean, at that kind of rate, I guess the expectation for China to become, say, a mature consumption society is a bit too high.
The point, I think China's perspective to 2035 is very realistic. Again, look at it from a fundamental macroeconomic point of view, which is, it was put very, very, very carefully formulated in typical Chinese way. Choose your words very, very carefully. At the beginning of the 2014 plan, it was that there is no obstacle to the doubling of per capita GDP between 2020 and 2035. So it's not officially a target, but on the other hand, if you say there is no obstacle to, that implies you think you're going to make it. That would need from 2020 to 2035, 4.7% growth rate average over that period. It's a little bit above it at the moment. It's about coming in closer to 5%, which is fine. You'll hit that target. But even then, we've got to be, which would mean that China's goal will become a developed economy. It will become high-income economy by World Bank standards.
Yes.
Not a high-income economy at the level of, say, the United States or Germany or something. We're Poland, Czechoslovakia, Portugal, that type of thing. That would be an incredible step forward. But China will then have to still undergo, to reach the per capita GDP of the US, you're still looking at 20, 30 years of growth after that. So I know China's got targets out to 2049. You might hit it by then. I think that's a bit optimistic. But I think the goal to 2035 is realistic. But China will still then face a long period of time before it catches up with the most advanced economies, because you just can't speed these type of enormous processes up very much, even with the best policies. 5% is great, but you can do the maths, and it's still going to take you a long time to catch up with the level of per capita GDP of Germany or the United States.
Mr. Canato, you want to respond?
Yeah, if I may, it's a very pretty good comments made by John. Just a note, by any standards, John, the ratios of consumption to GDP, as well as the ratios of household savings as a share of GDP, in the case of China, are anomalous. There's nothing like that, which suggests that definitely the normal would be to rely less in terms of share of GDP on the other components relative to the consumption, regardless of what one can say. That's you know, statistics is there. It's a very special case. Second point I'd like to make John is also correct about the upgrade of China in the income ladder. By the way, it's the title of my latest book is climbing a high ladder, and China is a very important component of the book. See, it's I spent 15 years in these institutions. I know from inside. It's a matter of time now with this pace, 5 and so on, that the threshold of a high income economy will be reached by China. It's a natural outcome of the growth differential that China exhibits vis-a-vis the average. And every year, the IMF, in its annual report about China, highlights the gains in terms of productivity that China might accrue in many services if it had exactly, let's say, replacement by SOEs, by state-owned enterprise, by private-owned enterprise in those service sectors. And that would lead to, let's say, almost a falling from heaven, increases in total factor productivity of China. I guess this is somehow, to some extent, this item has slipped off the agenda, but I believe it would be of interest to China to retake it, because that's a reasonably easy source of increase of productivity, particularly in areas like service, which tend to comprise increasingly a larger share of GDP.
Yeah. Arena, I want to have you to, of course, take a look at the Chinese growth, either led by export, investment, or by, say, innovation, high-tech growth, or by domestic consumption. I mean, as a large country like China is, I mean, that's the success itself is an inspiration, I guess, for, developing countries, or majority of the countries, probably take a look at what we can do, or if China can do, we can do it too, right?
Gosh, I suppose this is an easier question because someone could say all of the above. But what I want to zone in on specifically is how China's approached the industrialization policy specifically, in the green sector, and how, we've been linking it to consumerism as well. I think what's quite a nice tick to it is that China has made the green initiative essentially an aspirational initiative in which people want to be a part of in their everyday lives. And how that then manages to link to, other 5-year plans for green development, and how that talks to low carbon transformation of its industrial structure and national guidelines, etc. But what's also innovative is the establishment of, the green industrial facilities that, have special economic zones, especially that are oriented to complete supply chains or value chains for a green orientation. And I think this speaks, or this is rather a broader overview of how others may understand China's success, not necessarily in applying dual circulation policies, because not everyone can replicate that. And that becomes a contentious issue. But what I appreciate in terms of how China has taken its approach to growth is that it has bolstered its industrial base, essentially, and it's also allowed for international cooperation. And you see this through the Belt and Road Initiative, essentially, and how it's opened up, essentially, to the world, because it's the world's largest public-private partnership, bazaar, in which you're able to either bring business or go shopping and come out with a solution. And what this kind of links to is how China is then part of a solution, and its growth is not necessarily an internal thing where it focuses only on industrialization bases and the various centers of growth that we've been discussing, but it's part of a global vision where it wants to bring everyone in. I think that is something special in which China has crafted a very specific role for itself, where it doesn't necessarily where it hasn't said that it's going to be a leading power, or it's going to take the lead in these sorts of things. But as China's role settles for the next 10 years, and you see its continued rise, you're also going to see how it supports the rise of the middle power, and how it's able to then consolidate coalition building at multilateral levels. And this is done, through the symbolic support, but also the practical level support, and how China is able to create continuity and sustainability and the trust it intends to build through economic participation.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure Zun has your own observation, experience of China working together with middle powers, with countries from the global south, like Pakistan, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm in great agreement with the previous comment. I think one of the aspects that really makes China stand out is, first of all, as the previous panelist, she mentioned, commitment to multilateralism as well. And the approach that China has assumed, and successfully so, has been very multifaceted. So when China focuses on broadening its industrial base, China has simultaneously also focused on new technologies. But let's go back 10, 15, 20 years. The trajectory of China's growth has focused on very real, on-the-ground situations and addressing those challenges. And I feel that a lot of countries in the global south can deeply learn from that experience. An example, obviously, also with Pakistan, is that our partnership with China under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is obviously about big infrastructure projects that were announced over a decade ago. But increasingly, it's more about learning from China's example, how we can assess our realities, how we can improve our goals such as poverty alleviation, how we can even improve technological advancement in the core industrial cities. Another aspect is that China has always been seen as a stable partner. So whether Pakistan is thinking about its bilateral relationship with China, improving our yields, improving our export potential towards China or otherwise, we also know that when we sit on the same table under the SCO grouping, the perspective that China has towards the SCO region is the same. China, what we're thinking today, for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years, is going to be a consistent posture that China assumes. And I think that is the kind of long-term planning and the long-term perspective that has been beneficial for China's economic development. And it is also beneficial for the confidence that it instills amongst the global south, amongst middle powers, to just name a few. I'll also briefly mention that for a lot of countries, the global south is obviously parts of the world that are just none of the above in a way. They're just not the Western world, right? We are at different points in our developments. We have different challenges. And I feel where China, as opposed to some traditional partners like the United States or Britain was for Pakistan and many other countries, the difference is that China has a diversity of experiences within their own development, a very realistic perspective on how to address issues, and then they approach their partner country with that experience. And that is something which makes China more relatable and also makes China's commitment to, let's say, green development, sustainability, renewable energy, one that understands where developing countries come from. It's not just about telling developing countries to change the way they're doing things. It's about trying to analyze, engage them, and meeting them halfway. And I think that's definitely a very positive direction in which we see global relationships going because of China's presence and interest.
Right, to share equal terms. John, of course, given this rapid changes in the international landscape, or the realignment of the U.S. relations, for example, with Russia, together with disruption with the European Union across the Atlantic, for example, over the Ukraine issue, realignment of China and the European Union, for example, the resumption of this comprehensive investment agreement. Do you see there's a chance for them to come closer in terms of trade and investment?
Yes, I think there is a chance, but it would mean a reverse of policies which have been fairly self-harming in the last period. I mean, Germany has really pursued its policies very foolishly in regard to the United States. I mean, it's allowed the United States basically to cut off the gas supply from Russia by the war, which was foreseeable in Ukraine because of the expansion of NATO. Lots of people in the United States warned about this. I would hope, because it's in the interest, if they're going to have conflictual relations with the United States, which is Europe doesn't want, but it's not in their control. Trump has decided to have conflictual relations with the EU, and Europe can't do much about that because Europe doesn't decide whether the US has tariffs or not. I would hope that there would be sensible recognition of Europe's interests in this new world situation with Trump carrying on his tariff policies. Europe very, very much needs good relations with China. So that's hopeful, and it will be in their interests. On the other hand, not completely sensible policies have been pursued in the last period in that, too many concessions to anti-China feelings, but now Europe is deeply shaken up by what Trump has done. So there may be a reproach. Certainly I would think it's very well worth pursuing the possibility of improving relationships, because that would be in the mutual interests of both Europe and China. So I hope so would be the answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, with that, we are coming to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. We have John Gong in the studio, Zoom, of course, and Mr. Canuto, and John Ross, Arena, Vanna Rees. Many thanks to all of you, and you can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.
What's behind the next door? What motivates us to find the truth? To understand the world, we must see it from different angles. Never stop searching. Go deeper. Go further. Be open-minded. Be engaged. Open the door through dialogue, where ideas do matter.